So I think I was like a lot of the students when I was in school. From my first co-op term, I thought I have to get into external audit. That's where I need to start. But I guess in hindsight, I think internal audit is a very interesting path and option that you can take instead, especially if you're still trying to figure out what you really want to do in the future, because internal audit will allow you to see so many different aspects of whatever company you're working on, while you're still able to work on those auditing skills and developing those crucial skills, transferable skills that you can use in the future as well.
Yeah, so to add on to that, so I actually didn't go into external audit at all for all of my co-ops. It was, private companies or with the government, and then when I graduated, I went straight into TD's internal audit program. And I will say that I really enjoyed my experience. I don't necessarily feel like there's a huge piece I'm missing out, just because internal audit also works very closely with our external auditors. So the things that I learned from school when it comes to assurance, looking at financial statements, we do also have our SOX controls in here. So then you can kind of see how things relate from a perspective of, the external, you might be looking at more at substantive testing, materiality, but the internal, you're also looking at the processes and the controls that's getting you to those numbers, but from a different perspective, looking at what are the risks, do they have a sustainable control in place, and it just kind of gave you a really good insight into how all of these pieces fit together. So looking back on my journey, I feel like internal audit really did help me develop a lot of the key skills that I need, and a really good understanding of the inner workings of the bank, and what we've learned from school really helps to get you prepared into the workplace on day one. So I would say, there are definitely pros and cons to either path, but I've really enjoyed my path going straight into internal audit after graduating.
I just want to add, I think the perception of you have to do external audit first before internal audit probably stems from the time maybe Margaret and I were in the path of, if you were to get the CPA designation, you have to have 30 months of experience to be in an accounting firm before you can consider to do something else. And I think that's probably the perception that is there. And obviously during the recruiting session, you talk to people, you tend to hear that you start off from the Big Four, right, or any accounting firm, and then you get into internal audit. So I think that's probably just the old perception of how things need to work. But like what Alice said earlier, for example, like TD or any other organization, we have a CPA program that gets you to do internal audit to start off, right? And you can still get the internal audit designation. So, I don't think, it depends on the person, right? I think if you're into financial statement, external auditing type of stuff, looking at different companies' financial statement, yeah, maybe accounting firm is the way to go. I can jump in. Yeah, so for me, I was part of a merger and acquisition, and I play a role within the internal audit with the team and our chief auditor. So I think that's a very interesting experience. You get to do it real time and on deal that matters, right, for a company. So I think it's a really, really interesting experience just to learn about, the organization, the strategic thinking about why it creates value for the organization. You can be part of it, but at the same time you can provide value too. Yeah, so I think one of the value that we can provide back to the board, right, which is ultimately what it takes to approve a deal, is they want the comfort that everyone within the organization is doing the right level of work to assess whether or not the deal makes sense for the organization. And we provide value to the board by taking part of each and every conversation that the business counterpart have with the other side, and making sure that we did the right level of assessment, we come to the right financial conclusion, financial input to the model, the risk and mitigant around associated with the deal. So we want to make sure that all these things are really being done appropriately, and we have we get to prepare a conclusion to the board that this is what the complete due diligence process is, and the expectation that the board have is met.
For me, so it's actually quite interesting. So I've been fortunate to have done the rounds actually in internal audit. I've done IT, I've done data, and then I've done fraud, payments, and projects, right? But so it's really hard to pick a favorite, but I will say my last stint with fraud, payments, and projects, for one, no two projects are the same, right? And so that in itself was interesting because you literally cannot go back to last year's file, right? So when people think about, hey, go back to last year, there's no last year's file, right? And it is one of those really forward-thinking kind of things, because what we do with project audit is you're there as the project is running. So it's not a, let me take a look at what you did, project A. It's a, hey, what are you doing now, project A? And you really kind of get to think about, will this set you up for success? Will this set up the organization, the bank, in this case TD, for success, right? What do we need to look for? And I've done engagements where it's as varied as, trying to meet a new regulatory requirement and they have to change all their systems and configure their systems, to something like changing an actual operating model for a specific segment, right? And I don't think people realize the breadth of what internal audit can do, because we do provide that advice as well, right? There's definitely that assurance aspect, and there always will be, but there is that piece of what else do we need to think about, governance, how are the governance structures going to work? And then you have fraud, where it's really cool to see how their operations and their analytics are for the different products, from debit cards, credit cards, what do they look for, how do they monitor it, right? So there's lots of layers, and which is why, working in internal audit with that breadth and the depth is really, really valuable.
So I can share something I worked on the data audit team. So a few years ago, we led our very first artificial intelligence and machine learning audit, which is really cool, and it's really similar to what Margarita talked about. In project, there is no last year's file. This is like the first audit ever on AI and ML. So when I was talking about critical thinking earlier, it's like, what benchmark are you auditing against? In this field, there really isn't a clear benchmark. There's nothing in the regulation that says, okay, if you cover these areas, you're good. So when we approach the audit, there's a lot of research and thinking that goes into trying to figure out, what do we care about? What are some of the key risks? And that might be attending different conferences, talking to peer banks, even looking at what different lines of businesses are doing in their analytics space, how they're building up their solutions, because even within TD, there could be different processes that happens. So when we tackle this audit, like really one, it's assurance. Are we covering some of our risk? And a lot of the risk area here, it really kind of interconnects with a lot of other risk areas. So you have things like model risk, you have conduct risk, compliance risk, legal, technology, data risk. Like, is your input even accurate for you to develop a model that is going to treat our customers fairly, and things like that. And I would say the other thing we really looked at is also just helping to facilitate the conversation and kind of act as a party that helps to share practices between the different teams, and seeing, what are some of the considerations our auditees should make when they're thinking about how they develop their use cases, how do they deploy a new model into the market. So it was a really interesting experience. I would say it's not something where you're looking to cover everything, make it perfect. It's something that's really going to just evolve over time and become more mature as we get into more and more of these audits around events, analytics, emerging technologies.
I think one of the interesting audits that I was involved in would be the COVID impact audits that we did, yes, pretty recent. So because of COVID, the bank had to implement to change a lot of the processes, right? To serve customers better because people weren't able to go into branches anymore. So it's just really interesting to see how the bank reacted, the processes that they put in. And it was great to be able to participate in a way to see if their new processes were designed appropriately, if they were adequately addressing the risks.